All right, Lana, can you advance to the next slide? So before we begin today's session, just want to run through a couple of ground rules. So everyone has been placed on mute by the host. If you have questions for the presenters, please use the Q&A function. We will take a break at the end of each presentation to answer your questions. And then we're holding time at the end of the meeting to answer questions that we might not get to during the meeting. If you want to talk with other presenters, you're more than welcome to use the chat. And I think we can then get started. So with that, I'll turn it over to Mike Gower.
Thank you, Stephanie. Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to see 384 and counting people for the Finance Town Hall. I hope you all are staying dry, staying safe in this lousy weather day. But I'm glad you're with us today. Very excited about our agenda. If we could advance to that. We're going to spend some time hearing from Michael Zwick, my new friend and colleague as our Senior Vice President for Research. Then follow that with a budget update from David Moore. We're going to hear about the year-end close annual audit. We're going to get a view of the Samuel Dewitt Proctor Hall student student ABC space in the one-stop center, and then hear about the human capital management payment services migration. So a lot of ground to cover, but very good information. We're glad to have you with us. We have these town halls periodically so we can keep you informed of things going on in our world. Next slide, please. So again, it's my pleasure to introduce our guest speaker today, Michael Zwick. Michael is our new Senior Vice President for Research. He's going to talk to us this morning about the mission of the Office for Research, his major goals for the coming year, and his interest in data analytics that will benefit from close collaboration with the University Finance Administration Group and financial managers throughout the university. Michael received a Bachelor of Science from Cornell University in Biological Sciences. I spent some time working there, lovely place, and earned his PhD in population biology at the University of California, Davis. He's also served as a Navy surface warfare officer and was on active duty during Operation Desert Storm before being recalled to active duty for the Iraq War. Michael conducted his postdoctoral work at Case Western Reserve University School of Medicine and Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine, and continued to serve in the Naval Reserve, retiring in 2017 with more than 25 years of service. He is a serious researcher trained as an experimental population geneticist in both fruit flies and human systems. His research uses principles of genetics and bioinformatics to discover the causes of rare and common disorders. He's had continuous NIH funding since 2005, and his research has pursued diverse areas of human disease that include autism, dystonia, congenital heart defects, early onset inflammatory bowel disease, biliary heart, I'm going to mess that one up, and schizophrenia. It's my great pleasure to introduce to you Michael Zwick. Michael?
Well, thank you, Mike. Very pleased to be here. I'm really pleased to speak to everybody this morning. Can I get the next slide? So I'm a very mission-driven person, and it's one of the reasons I came to Rutgers is I had a deep sense of mission here, and so I thought a lot about what is the mission for the Office for Research, and this is our initial stab at this, thinking about this important sort of motivating influence for our team, and I use the word team a lot, and we really want a team with the Rutgers community, to create knowledge, advance discoveries. And I'll talk more about that, and team and collaboration are really going to be key to the way I lead the Office for Research. Next slide. So this is really the reason, one of the main reasons I came to Rutgers. And so the guiding values, the value proposition put forward by the president, Jonathan Holloway, and the idea of a beloved community, a relentless pursuit of academic excellence, and the need for strategic clarity. These all three spoke to me. And I felt like Rutgers was a place that I could have impact, and I thought there was just tremendous potential here. There was already enormous success, enormous opportunities, but there was such opportunities to sort of, come to an institution as large and complex and as interesting as Rutgers and really have impact and help us get to the next level. Next slide. So what are the strategies that guide my leadership? How have I thought about this coming into a large office? And the first is really teamwork. And I think about this both internal within the Office for Research. So I'm really focused on breaking down silos within our office to make sure that we are working together to advance research across the enterprise. There's teamwork with the people attending this talk, the University Finance and Administration team, which is really critical, a critical partner in the work that we do. And then ultimately, I really want to, as a faculty member, I intend to really be very outward looking and reach out to faculty, because we need to team with faculty. And I think one of the key things that I'm communicating to faculty is that they have to think about who is really their team. So it's typical in a science lab, for example, for a faculty member to say, well, my team is my technician and my graduate student and my postdoc, and that's my team. And I came to realize at Emory that actually my team was much larger than that, that the animal care technician, the pre and post award people, the intellectual property team, the corporate engagement team, these were all members of my team. And much as, I think finance and administration has become part of my team. I had, we demand that they manage budgets. They are very entrepreneurial in the way that they seek grants, particularly in the sponsored award space. But even for faculty who are not pursuing sponsored awards as sort of the mainstay of their research or scholarship, they still need services, they still need partnership. And so we want to team with them also. Next. So then if you build these teams, you want them to be efficient. And I think this is not surprising. And so I'm very focused on how do we become efficient? How are we an efficient organization? And I think I've learned a lot. There's a lot of things that we do well, and there's clearly areas that we recognize that we need to do better. And so I really am pushing for efficiency in the way we operate. And next. And so finally, I think one of the things that I think is most interesting about this role is that you can be really efficient, but if what you're doing is fundamentally flawed, or if the structure is not good in some way, that's really not worth your time. We can't just throw people at a system that is actually not designed very well. And so the question is, we seek innovation, and how are we going to recognize innovation? How does one think about that for someone who's the Senior Vice President for Research? And I want to tell you a little bit about how I approach this problem. Next slide. So I had this concept in my mind of, and this was from my time in the Navy, of a force multiplier. And this is an attribute that dramatically increases the effectiveness of a team or an organization. And the notion is that we want to solve problems in ways that are very general and have broad impact across our organizations, not just solve problems one-off at a time. Can you advance, please? So obviously this is actually a picture of the ship I served on. At the time, it was out of Newport, Rhode Island. Here we are on the left, refueling from alongside an aircraft carrier. This is another picture of the ship out at sea trials. So this was the USS Kaufman, FFG 59. And during Desert Storm, we had this newfangled thing. Hit advance once more. We had this newfangled thing over here to the left, which is missing a couple letters, but this is this newfangled thing called GPS. And now it may seem ridiculous to imagine because it's all in our phones, it's in my watch, it's in our, we use it all the time. But at the time in Desert Storm, GPS was only available to the military. It was actually encrypted, so there was crypto associated with it. But it turns out being in the Navy, knowing where you are on the planet allows you to carry out many of your missions much more effectively. And so you can do things like shoot a missile and have it not hit things it's not supposed to hit, and hit things that you aim for that it's supposed to hit. In the case of my ship, it allowed us to drive through a minefield in and out of Kuwait City. And we would have a whole series of civilian tankers following behind us in our wake, because we knew exactly where we were. We knew the path through the minefield. And so that allowed us to do that. So that one technology of knowing where you were allowed you to do many other things. And I'm probably underestimating the true number of missions that technology enabled. Now there's other force multipliers that are really obvious. So I put a picture over here of a mess hall, and we're feeding sailors. And so the question is, my ship had 245 people on board during Desert Storm. We had 2 Army helicopters, 2 Navy helicopters, and we're a relatively small ship, but we had to figure out how to feed each other. How do you feed the ship effectively? Because if you don't feed people effectively, you can't actually operate or get anything done, and you've lost your complete investment in the ship. And can you advance, please? And I can tell you that the Navy solution for feeding sailors is not give everybody a can of Sterno and a mini fridge and say, you're on your own, make your own food. But I have to say that is often the model that has been selected by academia, particularly in the research space, where we have this notion that we treat each faculty member as sort of an independent consultant or independent actor. And we don't think about the broader strategic implications of how do we promote interaction, collaboration, how do we do things that are for the good of the institution that will help faculty really thrive and achieve their full potential. And increasingly in my science, in genetics in particular is one example. When I started research, it really was very much single PIs working on problems in laboratories. And now it's increasingly like large consortiums with large teams, multi-institutional, multidisciplinary teams, transdisciplinary teams. And so this is sort of what I look for when I look for innovative ways to actually improve how we think about our research enterprise. Next slide. So Rutgers had a record year for research and innovation. I'm walking into a good situation. Rutgers had over $907 million in sponsored research. And it was really striking in looking at the data that there was a broad mix of that research. So it was federal funding, it was state funding, it was foundation, private foundation, and corporate funding. And it was quite well distributed among those 4 different types of funding, which I think bodes well for the institution. Having diverse sources of funding for sponsored research is a real strength. Licensing revenue also hit a record. There was one large transaction that really increased the total amount of revenue, the IBX sale, but it was still a record year. Next slide. And so there's lots of ways that we might measure impact. We can look at things like invention disclosures and awards and patents and grants. And in the sponsored award space, there are any number of things that we might wish to measure. And dollars and finances are easily quantitated, and they are in principle easily measured. I really want to look for impact. I want to look for discoveries and scholarship that really changes the world. So we don't want to be driven just by dollars. We're not a profit-making entity. We're not trying to get the most amount of money that we possibly can because we're turning a profit. At the same time, I think we need really good data analytics to actually assess where are we at and where our opportunities lie. And funding is actually really critical in a lot of the areas. So as Mike mentioned, I think this is an area that I'm particularly focused on in the Office of Research and really want to develop and we'll need all your collaboration to really get a real good sense of where we stand financially and then I think we can bring that to the broader university and we can sort of say, okay, here's where our strengths are, here are some opportunities. What are some long-term areas that we might wish to invest in or might wish to pursue? Next slide. So I'd like to go through a few of the accomplishments in the different parts of the Office for Research. So this is the research administration team. It's about 100 people. So this is about my largest organization in the Office for Research. They have rolled out service level agreements. I've highlighted in yellow a few of the things that I think are particularly relevant and important. Research contract services has begun using artificial intelligence to review contracts. And this, I think, is a really interesting idea. And I think there are multiple potential applications, particularly in the finance and administration space, where we might, for example, use AI to start reviewing closing down projects, for example. So I think this is an area of real potential collaboration. Research analytics and systems, as I mentioned, we have a small team working on moving these reports to Tableau so they can be seen quarterly or in an ongoing fashion. And there's a PI dashboard. And I have heard from PIs that I think this really is an area that we need to work on, that the tools available for PIs to have knowledge of, well, how much money do I have on my grant and how many funds do I have left, and what can I do with a particular line of sponsored research is an area that I think we need to look into and improve. We have just released or just pending release of the Research Administration Handbook, so you should be looking for that. So that has been the work of Jose Ramon and his team, and it's I think a real important contribution to the research enterprise. And then I think the IRB underwent a dramatic reorganization during COVID. It's undergoing AAHRPP accreditation, and really I think changed the culture of that organization, and is an area of of particular interest of mine and ongoing interest, certainly of many faculty who perform research with human beings, where we need a really strong and effective IRB. So this team has done an enormous amount of work. Next slide. So Innovation Ventures is my team that focuses on licensing revenue, discovery. They actually have, so they had a record year in licensing revenue, as I mentioned. They actually directly fund some investigators through Tech Advance and Health Advance, which are driven by proceeds from licensing revenue. There is a major initiative to actually standardize and have one patent policy for all of Rutgers that is being negotiated with unions right now. And I'm very hopeful that we will be able to very soon be able to have a single patent policy for the entire institution, which will be, I think, an amazing force multiplier for this whole space. I think one of the interesting challenges is, that we want to seek is we really want to engage our investigators and increase the number of disclosures and explore how do we increase the number of patents that we can see, startups. How do we support our faculty achieve their very best potential? Next slide. University cores. This is an area of particular interest. When I was at Emory, I went from running one core facility to running 18 core facilities, and I built an integrated core facility across Rutgers, and it really brought efficiency and really changed the culture of the institution. And this is something that I really want to bring to Rutgers. We already have cores within the Office for Research, but these core facilities, I think one of the things that I'm very interested in is building a more robust governance model that really engages the leaders and faculty from all the different chancellor-led units. But as you can see, there are funds which are which are awarded for core utilization grants, equipment grants. We're building the platform with iLab to have a core facility management software. So there will be a standard software which will make finding services easier. Billing and invoicing will be very easy. And then I'm also working on improving the websites to make them more discoverable and easier for faculty to investigate. And so this is an area of particular collaboration with finance administration, because obviously rate setting, we have to operate under uniform guidance. And this is an important area where we will, I imagine, collaborate very closely in the next year. Next slide. Animal care is my other second largest team, around 100 individuals. And I think this program has done exceptionally well. I think really, when we talk about force multipliers, the fact that we now have a unified program across all Rutgers campuses is really outstanding. This is a team who maintained 100% of their operations during the pandemic, which is astounding. And we have something called an ALAC accreditation visit in June. So this is a big and important visit to maintain our accreditation, and that's coming up in June. But this is an area of there's a lot of work. I work a lot with Tony Calcado's group on dealing with housing infrastructure, and I think there's a lot of work to be done in this space. But this is a really critical part of our research enterprise. And as we continue to grow and recruit faculty who use animals in the course of their research, we need to be able to provide this platform for our investigators to be successful. Next slide. So corporate engagement is an area that again, I'm very interested in. We have a new president of the foundation, Kimberly Hopley, that I'm going to be meeting with soon. And we have talked at some cabinet meetings. And I think this is a real area of opportunity for Rutgers. One of the great things about living in New Jersey is there is an enormous number we have enormous number of companies that live in New Jersey, between New York and Philadelphia, that are in New Jersey. We have a very educated populace. And I think this is an area where we have to build relationships. And I think, it's the industry investment in Rutgers is already quite large, but I think with the foundation and the new leadership, I think we can really grow this. And so I think this is a real tremendous opportunity, and I'm very interested in pursuing this. Next slide. And then research development is a new function that's in the Office for Research. And this is in close collaboration with the EVPAA, Prabhas Mogi. And here what we're trying to do is we're trying to get organized so that we can really seek sort of the larger, really high impact awards, where we really have to draw upon expertise across multiple chancellor-led units or across multiple schools, and bring all these ideas to a larger roundtable for strategic discussion. Because at the end of the day, we can't do everything well. We have to pick and choose what things we really want to invest in. And so this new research strategy roundtable that Prabhas has set up, and that he and I now jointly lead, is really going to be one of my key advisory committees, where it has the vice chancellors for research from each of the chancellor-led units. And they are my key colleagues in the research space that I really am using and leaning on to sort of get their feedback. Next slide. And then support services. I have a number of support services that live within the Office for Research and support the operations of the Office for Research, but they also they have outward looking aspects too. So information technology, for example, there's a core facility, OARC, which we'll want to build into this idea that I have about the Rutgers Integrated Core Facility. Our communications and marketing team does websites, announcements, tries to advertise all the great work that's being done here. And then finance is an area where I'm interested in actually looking and getting a better understanding, a better handle on the finance of the Office for Research. Next slide. So I have 5 initiatives in the next year. The top one, as I mentioned, is a unified patent policy. I mentioned that earlier. I think that will be really a force multiplier for research and is long overdue. And Tatiana in my team has done an enormous amount of work on this. One thing I've been struck by, there's not an F&A cost recovery policy for Rutgers. And I've heard a lot of faculty who have mistrust about the way cost recovery is flowing through the system when they do collaborative grants across the institution. And I think having a standard policy, and this will require close collaboration with all of you, having a standard policy can help begin to build that trust. And I think I understand what potentially is going on, and there's this. It's the handover from pre-award to post-award, and I have some ideas on how we can make that smoother. But having a standard policy for how this works, I think, would be really essential. I have a couple executive level vacancies. One is in finance that I'm particularly interested in. The other is in regulatory affairs. Compliance is perceived from a faculty member's perspective as something that's sort of stopping me from doing research. I try to turn it around and say, faculty member, you want to do research, you want to do your scholarship. Doing it in a non-compliant way will not allow you to do what you want to do. So you got to work with us. We got to help you. We're part of your team that allow you to maximize the amount of time that you want to do to pursue your research and scholarship. I want to launch a Rutgers Integrated Core Facilities. We're going to start with the cores that live within the Office for Research, but then have a much more systematic strategy to thinking about core facilities across the whole institution. And then, as I mentioned, leveraging the Research Roundtable for strategic promotion of research opportunities to really build collaborations across the institution. Next slide. I think that is my last slide. And so I'll stop right there, and I'm glad to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mike. It's an exciting agenda, and I'm certainly geared up to help work with you towards it. I think we have a few questions, and I have a question for you too. So, Stephanie, you have some in the queue?
Definitely. So a question about animal care. New veterinary residency, does that mean that Rutgers offers a curriculum for a veterinary degree?
No, that is it's a fellowship program. So I mean, G2 would give you the more details on this, but it's not a vet school, but it's people who have graduated from vet school and have to do a fellowship program. So it's sort of like a postdoc or a fellowship in the medical space. So they have a fellowship residency program. It is not every place has them. It's unusual that we have such a good program. G2 has been, really visionary in that, and it helps us actually recruit vets for our research enterprise and for the animal care as we continue to grow. So it's really beneficial to the program.
Great. What do you see as the biggest opportunity for procurement services to best support Rutgers research?
Yeah, that's a big question. Procurement. We obviously always want to seek efficiency and try to lower the cost of research, right? I think, and if we can figure out how to procure things in a central fashion or really allow multiple vendors to compete for particular services. I'll give you an example. I think aligning with core facilities in this space might be something. So when I ran the genomics core at Emory, we had a couple sequencers, but we decided to adopt a broker model for next generation sequencing, Illumina sequencing, which lots of people want. And so what we did is we got various vendors in the core facility. When investigators wanted sequencing, we could say, well, we can help you through these particular vendors. They came through the core facility. We helped them ensure that they got a quality product, they got the right turnaround, they got the right price, because there are differences among vendors and they benefited from the expertise of the core facility. And so I think that sort of alignment between procurement and that scientific knowledge could really be beneficial to our investigators, because if you want to be cold about it, at the end of the day, that company wants to get your money. They don't necessarily want to give you a quality product. And I think in the scientific space, that expertise, that a bit of extra knowledge and expertise and relationships that core facilities have with these vendors can be beneficial to investigators. Now, the companies really like it too, because then they only have to go to one source to actually get paid. So everything goes through the core, they get to know somebody, they get paid quicker, it's more easily, it's accomplished more easily. And it ends up being easier on procurement also, because you don't have POs coming in from all across the campus. You have a flow from a defined location. So that would be something I'd be interested in exploring and learning more about procurement and how it works here at Rutgers.
Before going back to the next question, I want to circle back to the veterinary care, animal care. Are there any plans at the university in the future to launch a veterinary school?
I'm not aware of any plans to launch a veterinary school. So I've not heard it discussed. So I'm not aware of any.
Yeah, I can speak to that. That was reviewed a few years ago after the integration with the units that came from UMD&J. I worked at one institution with a veterinary school. They are very, very complicated to set up, and I think that it would be a significant stretch for us to be able to do that. And that was kind of the summary findings of that examination. I worked at Cornell in the area that had the veterinary school, and it was a tremendous operation. It had a very large amount of NIH funding for human research using animal models. It was a very exciting place, but it would be tough to set up.
Thank you for that, Mike. Our next question is, who owns the patents that our researchers get?
So patents are, when you're a researcher at an institution, the patent is usually owned by the institution, and the institution pursues the patent licensing on behalf of the faculty member. There are cases where the institution may choose not to pursue licensing for a given patent, at which point the institution typically signs the rights over to the faculty members so that they can pursue licensing on their own if they wish.
Thank you. Do you see an opportunity to strengthen relationships with our state agency partners and funders?
Yes, definitely. I think this is definitely something worth pursuing. One thing I've heard from multiple sources are how are F&A recovery costs paid for by the state or or in some cases not paid for by the state, or how is that negotiated, or why is there's instances where we waive F&A recovery even though there are true costs to doing the research. So I think building those relationships is definitely really really key, and something that I'm interested in doing.
Great, thank you. Do you have a timeline for filling the vacant executive positions?
Both positions are recruiting candidates right now, so I'm hopeful we'll be able to fill those positions, I would think, in the next 2 or 3 months, if not sooner. So
great. So financial system constraints continue to be a concern with faculty and staff. What are some ways that you suggest that we can move beyond this?
Financial system constraints. So I'm not totally certain I understand exactly the question. I mean, I think, I'll give you one example. Maybe this is, I'm not sure this is quite answering it, but I think the F&A recovery and the flow of recovery associated with research cost incurred is an area where I've heard many faculty say they lack confidence, even though I know that the financial systems are set up and allow you to set up accounts and so what's happening is, in this case, is I think we don't quite have the right procedure in place to set up accounts in ways that build that confidence among faculty members. And so I mean, I think there are always opportunities to improve systems, and I'm sure Mike Gower will be the first to say that. But I also think there are opportunities for us to make sure that we have straightforward policies and we're using the systems to the full benefit and their full capability. And so I think that's one of the things that I really want to work with Mike on, is we look deeply, and his team, we look carefully at this and sort of ask, are we, and we're already starting to do this with Mike and his team, looking at sort of some F&A cost recovery and actually exploring, are there features in the Oracle database, for example, that have just not been activated as of yet. And so there was a history to this. There was a big effort made to improve the system, and it really stopped when COVID happened. And Mike and I met a couple of weeks ago and are really starting to remove that forward again. So I'm hopeful that, I hope to partner with many of you and really be an advocate and explain to faculty what we're doing and build teams rather than have this be a finger pointing adversarial relationship.
I think that really is it, Mike, taking advantage of systems that are in place, but fine tuning them to be more communicative with the PIs, perhaps, and use of data analytics for other kinds of advanced reporting that might be useful. But I do think getting back to those, I would call them fixes, I would call them adjustments, I'd call them better use of the system that we identified pre-COVID that got hung up. It's time to get back to those and also look at how our colleague institutions may be having used something better than we have.
Thank you. So I think we have a few more questions, and then we'll close out with Mike's question. So PIs are upset about the increasing fringe benefits rate. Are there any plans to help with covering the increasing cost of fringe benefits?
Yeah, I mean, we have heard this a lot. And so it's worth recognizing that, why have the fringe rates gone up in the first place? And so the fringe rates have gone up because the state of New Jersey is actually fully funding the fringe system in the state of New Jersey. And then basically they take how much they're going to spend in a year and they divide it by everyone in the all state employees. And you set a fringe rate based upon that. So the challenge that we face at Rutgers is that in the state of New Jersey, about 75% of the people in the pension system have a defined benefits plan, and about 25% have a defined contribution plan. At Rutgers, it's exactly the opposite. So about 75% of us are in the defined contribution plan, meaning we save money and we get 8% money put into a 403B, and only about 25% of our staff are in the defined benefits plan, have a standard, have a pension. And so the problem is that it's the defined benefit plan underfunding, that pension part, that is actually really driving the really high fringe rate increase. And so what we're trying to do is we're trying to work with the state, and Pete McDonough's team is working closely with to get legislative relief to actually just pay what we're supposed to be paying for the benefits that we're receiving. And I think if we do that, the fringe rate would go down. But let me just say, I think everyone in the cabinet is aware of this. I recognize this. The fringe rate at Rutgers is more than, is double basically what it was at Emory and other institutions. It's very high in the Big Ten, and it is a competitive disadvantage for our faculty. I mean, the reality is the limit on an NIH grant was increased in the early 1990s when the NIH underwent its doubling, I think was the last time, and it hasn't changed since then. And so, so we're trying to fit more, it effectively ends up being basically a tax on the science or a tax on the research that investigators can pursue. So this is of high interest to many of us, and we're really working to try to find solutions for this.
Thank you. Our next question. So with more movement to try to get to carbon zero, is there an emphasis on including more research in that area? And are there any new projects that you can talk about that you can share?
Certainly, I mean, I can't speak to specific projects. I mean, I think there are important areas in this research that are NSF funded initiatives with climate, and there are some large funded initiatives, for example, in the School of Engineering in particular. I don't have a list right offhand, but this is definitely an area of opportunity, and I think an area where Rutgers can have impact.
Okay, great. And then our final question before turning it back to Mike Gower. So there's been a lot of discussion about corporate engagement. What about continued work with community-based organizations? They often don't have the same research structure in place that we do, and I find that our research officers are not well equipped to provide technical assistance for setting up things like research agreements and subawards. So are there any plans for sensitizing Rutgers staff to working with CBOs?
So that's an interesting, that's an interesting comment. And I would think, I think there's no doubt that our research organizations are probably more familiar with working with foundation or corporations. I would be certainly glad to look into this. And I think, we definitely want to support engagement and exactly these sorts of institutions. I mean, we are a public university. We are the State University of New Jersey. We serve the people of New Jersey, so we definitely need to work with them and find ways to make that more efficient. And I would certainly be glad to look into particular cases, and this is something I'll go back to my team and talk about and see how we can better support.
Great, thank you. Okay, Mike Gower, you mentioned that you had a question that you would like to raise.
And just everyone in the audience, if you have other questions for Dr. Zwick, please throw them into the chat or the Q&A. We'll gather them and advance them to Mike and then post responses along with the materials or the recording of this meeting. But Mike, I had one question for you from your perspective as a researcher, looking at Rutgers, not so much the SVP for research, but as a researcher, what do you see as the big prospects for the collaborations or advancements, especially as we look across, New Brunswick and RBHS, which was the whole intent of one of the intents of the integration?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are profound big problems that we can be making impact in, whether they're in climate change, in healthcare. I think there's, in particular, like in my field in genetics, I'll give one example. I'm a faculty member in the Department of Genetics in New Brunswick, and yet genetics is essential for every discipline within RBHS. And that is an area where, the Genetics Institute is a site where we could maybe promote collaboration. So are there more innovative financial models? I mean, I think one thing that Rutgers has a lot of institutes and centers, but I think institutes are often owned by a given chancellor unit, and could we position them so that they had a financial model so that they were more shared between two different chancellor-led units and promoted that sort of interaction and engagement that we hope to achieve. So I think that's one idea that would be worth thinking about and pursuing. I think the other thing is, I think the core strategy that I'm interested in pursuing, these cores do many things. They're not just a financial operation and provide services and fees. They actually do much more than that. In fact, they're not a business. They're a strategic investment. And they become a knowledge center. And to the degree that we can align them with recruiting and promote engagement and promote discovery of different people through the core across the campus. This happened a lot at Emory, and Emory is a much smaller institution. Both physically, we're located in one location, but you would still discover people in the institution that you had no idea existed who were, astounding researchers. And so I'm hoping that the core facilities can be one of these sort of interdisciplinary organizations where people will discover each other, will come to, and I think as an institution, we'll use our funds as wisely as we possibly can to go after impactful sort of problems.
Well, thanks. And on behalf of the over 500 participants in this town hall, thank you very much for joining us today, for telling us a little bit about your background and where you come from in terms of where you want to go with the Office of Research and as part of this great university. So we appreciate it very much and hope you have you back again in the future to hear from updates.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mike. Thank you for allowing me to share some vision about the Office for Research and giving me the opportunity to speak. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. We're going to take a 2-minute break while we readjust for the next segment. And so please hang on and we'll be right. Okay, we're back, and we're going to transition now to the next item on our agenda. Next slide, please. I'd like to introduce David Moore, our Associate Vice President and Chief Budget Officer, to talk about the fiscal 22 budget. David?
Great, thank you, Mike. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining today's town hall. Through this presentation today, I would like to share an update on the FY22 budget and a first look at the first quarter actuals. Next slide, thank you. Developing and monitoring a budget in a normal year is a huge piece of work. As you can imagine, with the pandemic, the demand has been even greater under current circumstances. I'd like to thank the many individuals that work on and monitor the budget throughout the fiscal year. The total FY22 budget is $4.8 billion and reflects the values of the university in fulfilling its core priorities of teaching, research, service, and clinical care. The budget reflects a statement of our priorities while providing a recognition of our fiscal limitations that we all will face. Next slide. Thank you. Let's now turn to where the 4.8 comes from. What are the revenue sources that support the university? For FY22, approximately 29% of the revenue will come from tuition and fees. Patient care services, including revenues from governmental payers and private insurers for patient care, and accounts for approximately 22% of the annual revenue budget. Almost 19% of the university revenues come from the state of New Jersey through operating revenues and restricted funds that support a portion of our costs. Sponsored research includes grants and contracts from federal, state, and non-governmental entities and makes up approximately 14% of the university's total revenues, while miscellaneous sources, which include student aid, auxiliary enterprises, athletics, endowment, and investment income, accounts for approximately 15% of the overall revenue. Rounding out the sources of revenues include one-time federal relief funds for this fiscal year. Next slide. This budget spends $4.8 billion on the things that are most important to the university. In this budget, almost 78% is spent on our core missions of student instruction, research, public service, and patient care. Approximately 14.5% is spent on administration as well as operations and maintenance of our facilities. 4.8% is spent on auxiliary enterprises, which primarily includes housing, dining, and parking, and 2.8% is spent on athletics. Next slide. So now that we have a good foundation of the budget, let's look at the first quarter actuals for FY 2022. When we compare the first quarter actuals to the budget, we are looking for how much we have collected in revenues or have expensed as it compares to the budget. In addition, in this, is the experience consistent with our prior year actuals? In this first chart of revenues, we start out with our tuition and fees found on the first line. Through September, we have collected approximately 16% of the approved budget. And when compared to previous years, we see that we are consistent. And with all things remaining equal with prior years, we feel that this budget is aligned with what we could achieve. The same review and positive variation was found for the next category in federal and state student aid. There are some variations when we get to the federal appropriations, but this change is more associated with timing and receipt of reimbursement. As we go through this, through the list of revenues, the next several categories that would include state appropriation, state paid fringe, contracts and grants, facilities administrative recoveries, endowment investment income, healthcare and affiliated and house staff revenues are all on track and consistent or slightly above prior year experience. Other sources of revenues and auxiliary revenues are coming back to a pre-pandemic prior year experience. Total revenues show a slight increase when compared to the prior years at this particular point in time for the first quarter. Next slide. Now that we've seen the revenue side, for our expense categories, we'll go through some of these categories. So total compensation is slightly below prior years. This is also true for supplies and other, as well as professional services. Other categories are slightly below the 3-year average when you look at the prior fiscal years. Much of this change is due to the overall effort to contain costs and monitor our spending, which all helps with the university's financial performance. When we look at the total expense of 21.65, we see that we are within alignment within our last few fiscal years, but just slightly below. So this overall review kind of gives you an understanding of kind of the first quarter of actuals as compared to the annual budget or actuals through September. And we will continue to monitor the progress as we move forward. While this year's budget represents a move toward a more normal year, and dare we say a new normal, we won't be there yet. There are many concerns about the continuing impacts of the pandemic. If we've learned anything from the last year, it is the need to stay nimble and to be able to adjust to something we might not even foresee now. Because of these uncertainties, we need to continue prudent spending controls, which includes position reviews, tempering the desire for resumed business travel while allowing for necessary academically related travel, and continuing discretionary spending reviews. Next slide. And then kind of closing through the FY22 financial plan, we strive to provide an affordable, high quality education for our students while achieving academic and research excellence. With this will conclude my overview of the budget and first quarter view of the actuals. Stephanie, do we have any questions in the chat screen or the Q&A?
There are some questions, David. Just bear with me for a second. I just lost my Zoom connection.
No worries.
But I trust you can hear and see me right now?
Yes.
Okay, great. So our first question is the breakdown of the 4.8 billion of where the money comes from. Is that typical for other Big Ten schools or universities in general? And has the state of New Jersey's contributions been decreasing, increasing, or has not changed much?
I'll start with the state appropriation. In a total percentage, it hasn't changed much. It's been fairly consistent. We've had some increases, but we also have experienced some one-time decrease, especially during the pandemic. But we were restored, if you will, back to our levels prior to the pre-pandemic. In terms of kind of the makeup of the budget compared to other Big Tens, I think the one thing there are some comparability, some areas that are you can see where we're consistent, where there's a dependency on the tuition and fee side, and some of the healthcare revenue if there's a hospital or a medical school associated with the Big Ten. And there's some differences too, and that just recognizes the difference between the campuses and the importance of each campus too, and what they spend their resources on.
The second question that was raised by Bill Troy has already been answered in the chat. And I believe right now, those are the only questions we have. Excuse me. If you have any additional questions for David, you can enter them in the Q&A.
Great. Thank you, Stephanie.
Great. It looks like, oh, David,
yep,
you almost got away. Looks like we have another question. So my unit is losing staff, and we are now taking almost 3 months on average to fill lines. This is leading to poor morale and an inability to, so hold on for a second, ability to do the amount of work we need to keep us functioning. Any slowdowns, continued position review are adding to this time lag. At what point does the trade-off between the review and getting the work done need to be readjusted? And by the way, we've only had single digits in our staff requests turned down since the start of the pandemic.
Right. Well, I think, you know, so it's a good point. And when you're looking at overall current markets, we know that not only Rutgers, but other agencies are having a difficult time with filling vacancies. The review is so important so that we make sure that we're staying to mission critical. So again, you know, I know that our colleagues in HR are working very diligently through the review. I know we've streamlined a lot of the review process from the beginning, which has really helped quite a bit for the units working through. And I just encourage you to work with HR and work on your positions. But I think there's a larger issue coming on, and that is just the overall applicant polls and being able to fill vacant positions.
Yeah, David, let me add a little bit to that. So if you're referring to the RF process, that has been delegated fully to each cabinet unit. So for instance, anything in UFA comes to me, anything in Newark goes to Dr. Cantor's office. And each unit, each of the cabinet units has set up their own mechanism by which they review and approve positions. Once those are approved, provided there's no change in the position itself, it goes through HR straight through. That if there is a change in the position, it does have to go through compensation review or perhaps some other piece. And the same kind of experience you're having in your unit, we're having in University Human Resources as well. So I've been working very diligently with Vivian Fernandez to get in capacity, to be able to move positions, to look at different ways of streamlining the process, because it's a tough one for everybody. We have a lot of positions open in HR, a lot of positions open in UFA for the same reason. But the position review, as David said, is still a necessary piece, given that we have an uncertain new normal. Not even sure that we're quite there yet, coming out of the COVID emergency. And I'll answer that last question. How many institutions reporting record investment income? How did we do in fiscal 21? So the last of the mark-to-markets are coming in as part of the audit, but it looks like we're in the neighborhood of 35% year over year. What I'm most interested in, most happy about, is looking at the longer term play. What is the 3, the 5, the 10-year returns, all of which are positive and exceeded inflation during that time period, which is the important piece for that. Last year was an extraordinary year for investments. No one can count on that year over year. Investments in the endowment are for the long run, in fact, for perpetuity. So it's important to keep it steady and keep it diversified. So it's but we're very happy with performance last year. Stephanie, are there any other questions for David?
I don't have any additional questions at this time. No.
All right. Thank you very much, David.
Thank you.
Next slide, please. And speaking of the audit, let me introduce Ernie DeSandro, Associate VP and University Controller, to give you an update on where we stand.
Thanks, Mike. Good morning, everyone. Next slide, please. So first, I wanted to go through the year-end close. Basically, this would be for our June 30 year-end 2021. We are substantially complete. Basically means that unless there's something material that comes out over the next couple of weeks, we will not be proposing any additional adjustments to the financial statements. We are, however, waiting for the state of New Jersey for some of the information regarding our share of post-employment benefits. These are other than pensions, what's also called OPEB. And basically, the university is waiting for their allocation of the expenses that are held at the state level. And so we are waiting for those numbers, and we'll book the entry to our financial statements. That's basically the last entry that we would have to make. In the past, last year, for example, we received the number from the state in the January timeframe, late January. And so we were able to publish our financial statements, complete them and publish them in February. So far, the information from the state has been that we can expect the same timeline as last year. So I know that many of you have a lot of stakeholders out there that are looking for our financial statements. And that's basically the timeline that we're expecting. The annual audit, just as a reminder, we put together an audit plan with our auditors early in the process to basically begin the audit for the fiscal year in May. And that's where there's a lot of planning activities, a lot of meetings being held to understand changes in processes and do a basic risk assessment, identifying some areas that may need additional audit work. And then in June through August, we begin our interim field work. And this is really a testament to the hard work that the university and all of you have done over the past few years now to do and implement a monthly close process. we do interim field work based off of the year-to-date March results. And that really gives us a head start in terms of the audit. And then we spend the months of September through October completing the year-end field work. And again, we are basically done. I know we have some outstanding items related to the field work, but again, we're not expecting any material adjustments coming out of that. Tomorrow is our audit committee meeting, and we are presenting the substantially completed draft for fiscal year 21 to be conditionally approved and then deferred to our audit chair, Heather Taylor. And so again, I want to take this time to thank everyone for all of the cooperation and support. I know that some of you on this call are relied upon to produce a lot of the selections and deal with the auditors, and continuing to work with us to make sure we can make this process as smooth as possible. Fingers crossed, we're in our home stretch here, and we appreciate all of the hard work. That's basically the update on the year end and the audit. Stephanie, are there any questions?
There's just, there are two questions actually. So one, is there a centralized location to find monthly closing dates? It seems like the timelines only are provided via email.
Yeah, and that looks like you entered that, or you answered that in terms of our dates on our UFA website under the events timeline.
And then the second question is, does this mean we don't anticipate future furloughs?
Well, I mean, in terms of our financial statements, the financial statements are separate from the decisions that are made for operations.
I'll pick that up, Ernie. So, and Ernie's correct. The furlough considerations are more in the budget and projection view going forward. We don't anticipate any furloughs this year, but then again, we didn't anticipate having to have them when COVID landed. So I'm cautious about predicting many things these days, given that all during the course of from March 2020 going forward, whenever we thought we knew something, we were challenged with that, but there are none planned in this year. And the question about meeting contract raises, yes, those are, the university will meet its contractually obligated agreements as they were renegotiated last fiscal year.
Great. We also have another question. Were there any pain points during the audit?
Thanks for that. For sure, I should have mentioned this too. This is probably our third audit now, at least two of them that were all done virtually, and so that's been considerable accomplishment given the timelines that we have, and some of the audit procedures that require paper, and some of our selections and some of the data behind there. So in terms of pain points, it's been that transition of moving, from a paper base to a completely electronic. What we typically do, and I think that, if I were to hammer down, is that the importance of the interim field work and the work and the selections that are presented early on based on year-to-date March. That's a really, really important step for us. And so what we continue to work with is to make sure that when those selections are done and presented in the early interim work, that we spend as much time as possible trying to accomplish that, because then it keeps the work that we need to do for the months of April, May, and June more confined and more streamlined, and so that we can work on that. But I'm pretty pleased with the way that we've been able to transition to a complete remote environment, and the work that everybody's done. It's a testament to the commitment of all of you in the field, and certainly the folks on Christie's team.
Great. Thank you, Ernie. That's all the questions we have for now. And so I'd like to welcome Anthea Jeffrey, the Associate Controller for Student Accounting, Billing, and Cashier Services. Anthea.
Good morning, everyone. Next slide. I'm Anthea Jeffrey, and I'm going to be presenting on our student accounting, billing, and cashier services that we provide to the university and students and families. Next slide, please. Okay, so I just want to talk a little bit about our responsibility, that we are pretty much here to resolve any financial barriers for students. And some of our services include tuition and fees billing, our payment center, delinquent accounts and collections, and then our accounting and reconciliation as well. And I wouldn't read through each one of them, but we can go to the next slide. Okay, we also have social responsibility, and this is something that we've taken up during the pandemic, where our staff felt the need that we needed to give back to our frontline workers. And during the pandemic, we were able to fund 60 frontline workers lunch through the staff at Student ABC. So I'm very happy just to talk about that. We also work with the university Adopt a Family program, and we're also able to fund a family through that program as well too. So really excited to say thank you to the staff in Student ABC for their social responsibility and for doing that work. Next slide, please. So we want to talk about our move from Records Hall at 60 George Street to the Dr. Samuel DeWitt Proctor Hall at 65 Davidson and Piscataway. We also still house a payment center, very different from our cashier's location that was at the Records Hall location. So I just want to show you what we went from to what we went to. Next slide, please. So this is where we had our students come in at Records Hall to be serviced. And while we did our best to maintain a nice, clean environment for the students, we, of course, thought the students deserved much better location and a nicer area to conduct business. So the university, of course, moved us into our new location, the Dr. Proctor Hall Student Services Center. And Student ABC is one of the business units that is being serviced by the One Stop. And we've outsourced our, of course, in-person customer service to the One Stop there. And so the experience is what you're seeing now. This is what students will walk into when they visit the Dr. Proctor Hall. And the next slide here is the payment center. We just wanted to show you pictures of the new location where students, if indeed they have a cash payment, and that's an extreme exception, they will come to the payment center on the second floor to make that payment. And I just want to talk to you about the in-person experience that students are going through now. So we have Jack, who comes in, checks in using the one-stop self-service check-in process. He's queued and waits into the designated socially distanced waiting area. And then Jack's turn is up, and he's assisted by a one-stop specialist. And if that specialist needs to escalate an issue to one of my staff, then he's redirected to student ABC staff for the escalated process. And then the virtual one-stop experience. So like a day like today, when it's bad weather and it's snowing, our students are still getting the same sort of high-level customer service as if they were in person. So they would visit our student abc.rutgers.edu website. So this is specifically for student accounting information if they're looking for. And if they have any additional questions, they will submit a question via the customer service link on the website. And this is Jessica's experience. Jessica's inquiry is placed in a queue where she's responded to timely. And of course, if Jessica's inquiry needs to be escalated to a student ABC staff member, then she will be put into the queue, and my staff will be able to process that inquiry. And so I just wanted to talk about some highlights for fiscal year 2021. I want to make sure that everyone is able to see the full details. So if you visit the studentabc.rutgers.edu website, you'll be able to see our annual report that highlights all of these things from fiscal year 19, fiscal year 20, and fiscal year 21. And you'll see the varying differences of what we've been doing over the years. And for fiscal year 2021, I just pulled out a few highlights. Of course, we billed 1.6 billion, and we received about 641 million. This is excluding financial aid. So this is our services that we provide to the students virtually so that they can make payments online. And we're not going to forget the cash payments. I know that was a situation where we closed our cashiers' locations because we wanted to make sure students are utilizing the virtual services as best as possible. But of course, we still were able to take in some cash payments of 138,000. And just to show the varying differences, fiscal year 20, we took in 1.9 million in cash only. And fiscal year 19, we took in 2.6 million in cash only. So this is a dramatic decrease in cash payments that students are making. And lastly, I wanted to talk about future goals for student ABC. And so we want to talk about refund automation. While we automate our Title IV portion of refunds for students, we want to do the non-Title IV portion, so that what we're doing eventually is processing refunds to students before they even think about asking for it. So we want to be proactive and not reactive. We also are working on our Tableau reporting so that we can provide you with hands-on information where you can get data directly from our system without having to ask someone for a report for specific information that you're looking for. We want to also talk about our international payment plans. While we have payment plans for our domestic students, we have a growing international student population. So we hope for the future that we will be able to have some international payment plans where our international students can take advantage of making payments monthly. And then, of course, more automation again with DocuSign and putting the student loan promissory notes and the student financial responsibility statement into that process. And I think we went live with our student loan promissory notes this morning. So I'm extremely happy and excited for fiscal year 2022. And so looking forward to any questions that you may have for me.
Excellent. Thank you, Anthea. That was a great update. Thank you for sharing the photos of your new location. It looks fascinating. So we have a few questions that have come in. Does your office have a way to confirm that an employee is eligible for tuition remission, as some people may be RBHS legacy or Rutgers legacy?
Yes, I'm glad you asked that question. So we have that information on our website, actually. And so we work with our partners in human resources to update any information that employees and or staff may be looking for in terms of eligibility. And so everything should be on the website. So if there is a situation where you're looking for a specific person or a specific type of employee information, if they're eligible and it's not on the website, please let us know and we'll be able to update the website with that.
Great. The next question, I presume this has already been thought of, but is there a mechanism for a survey after the service to benchmark that the problem is solved? And if so, are they automatically escalated?
Yes, so we work with our partners in the One Stop to include that after every service that a student gets or is resolved in the One Stop area. And whether it's good or bad, we ask for their feedback.
Great. We have time for just one more question, and then we'll transition to our next speaker. The additional questions that we're not able to get to, as Mike mentioned earlier, we will follow up with Anthea and others as appropriate, and then ensure that we post the Q&As to the finance website. So our next question is, how can the student accounting system accommodate graduate students who have tuition and fee remissions? Too often they receive delinquent notices that they should not receive, and how can the system adapt to make their experience at the university better?
Okay, so there's two different types of remission that we're talking about. So once you have applied for remission, it's an automatic transition after the ad drop period to our system. And if it's the situation where the remission is being paid for by a department, we ask that they provide that information to us timely. So it's pretty much dependent on time and when those remissions are being applied for. And I would really like that person that asked that question to reach out to us to see if there is a lapse in any of our processes that we've put in place. I just want to make sure that we didn't miss anything, but once you've applied for remission, it's going to be processed timely.
Thank you.
Thank you, Anthea. I appreciate the update on that. A lot of progress, and it's a wonderful new facility. Our last speaker today I'd like to introduce is Mankit Shu. He's the Senior Business Manager from the Project Management Office, and he will give you an update on two key projects from the PMO, one of which relates to Anthea's operation. So, on mute. It's got to happen.
Thank you. Thank you. I'll be the one. Thank you, Mike, for the introduction and for letting me know. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for this opportunity to present today. As you may know, the UFA PMO has numerous projects in our portfolio, including the Student Information System, Customer Relationship Management, Chart of Accounts redesign, among many others. Today, I'd like to provide you with updates for two of our projects, one in flight and one in its beginning phases. The first project I'd like to highlight is the Payment Services Migration. In April of 2020, Scholarship, a vendor providing multiple payment and refund services to the university, informed us that they could no longer support Rutgers as a service provider, effective as of July 1st, 2020. As you can imagine, this was highly problematic due to the wide scope of services provided and populations affected, including payment and refund services for over 60,000 students, as well as departmental payments for a multitude of units across the university. As David noted, those payment streams, particularly tuition and fees, represented a large portion of revenue to Rutgers and couldn't go interrupted. Another challenge was that the service termination was landing right at fall term bill time, as well as year-end close. As such, we had to scramble to assemble a project team, come up with a project plan, and ensure business continuity for all of those services in the span of 3 months. So multiple areas within UFA and OIT, Treasury, the Controller's Office, Procurement, Financial Information Systems, OIT mainframe, financial cloud teams, of course, student accounting. Many others had to come together and organize quickly to facilitate the change. Communications and change management were also key areas of importance, needed to socialize and coordinate these changes with the different departments. We selected Nelnet Business Services for our new long-term service provider, given their resiliency, experience with higher education, and equal ability to interface with both legacy and modern student systems. So we were future-proofing a bit there. We had also worked with them recently to successfully launch a new student cashier system. If we move on to the next slide, we can kind of look at how the timeline played out. In July 2020, we launched student payment plans via Nelnet, as well as an interim solution for departmental and student term bill payments via School Pay. It was a partner of Scholarship. And these immediate quick wins gave us some additional breathing room to approach the rest of the project in a more phased, controlled manner, and allowed us to place additional emphasis on testing and resiliency throughout the rest of the project. We subsequently launched student electronic refunds in November 2020, and are now in our final phase, which is the migration of departmental and student payments to Nelnet. We've successfully launched vendor integration with Oracle Financial Cloud and have begun rolling out individual departmental payment orders in phases. We currently have over 15 departments, including admissions, registrar and dining, to name a few, in production and accepting payments successfully via the new vendor. So we'll continue to migrate additional departments in the coming months and ultimately aim to have the project fully completed by spring 2022. It started out as a very chaotic scramble, but we were able, as a team effort involving many areas on this call, to bring order to chaos and, most importantly, ensure a smooth transition for the end users. So we're pleased with how things are progressing there. And again, I appreciate the continuing efforts of everyone involved to bring that to fruition. Next, I'd like to provide an update on the Human Capital Management Project, or HCM. The objective of HCM is to transform how human resource and payroll services are delivered at the university through updating processes and upgrading technology to fulfill the following objectives: designing simple, easy, unified processes to deliver high quality service, increasing control, reducing risk, and ensuring high levels of compliance, leveraging technology to improve automation and reduce manual processes, and providing data that is integrated, validated, timely, and secure to inform business insights. We move on to the next slide. As part of the Cornerstone Initiative, the project will further expand Oracle Financial Cloud with a full suite of HCM modules that will facilitate streamlining operations and reducing costs, increasing productivity, engagement, and retention, moving to a proactive rather than reactive analytics approach, leveraging modern cloud and mobile technologies, and then providing ability and flexibility to adopt new tools and adapt to change. We aim to accomplish this by reviewing the people, process, and technologies utilized within human resources at payroll. If we move on to the next slide, we can see this illustrated, and then using that information to design and implement a future state. So each of these areas represented here are critical to successful operations, and they all have a symbiotic relationship. The people serve as the foundation and facilitators. The processes support alignment and consistency, and the technology provides the mechanism to deliver core services. One area doesn't work without the others. So while this has an important system component, this is not solely a system project. We aim to look at each of those areas holistically to improve the employee experience. Again, because the people are the foundation, this is a very people-centric transformational process. To that end, phase one of the HCM initiative is now underway, and it incorporates several work streams that will help the university prepare for the implementation of Oracle HCM Cloud. This timeline, as illustrated here, is tentative, but as noted in the slide, several activities have already commenced. Visioning activities with our executive committee to ensure leadership alignment, provision of a decision-making framework, and establishment of consistent stakeholder communication, organizational alignment, which involves identifying and understanding the impacts this project will have on other projects in flight, such as the chart of accounts redesign, and of course, vice versa, and a time and absence fit gap, which is an assessment of requirements to enable some early program decisions that need to be made. The remaining major workflow area, which is starting soon, is the business process review for central and campus units. Moving on to the next slide, we see that our vision for the business process review can be summarized as a desire for simple, clear, and uniform processes that will reduce complexity, provide clear direction and understanding of roles, and a consistent standardized business model. In keeping with the theme of collaboration Dr. Zwick mentioned in his presentation, this is a highly collaborative effort, and we'll need the help, resources, insights, and time of our central and campus partners to move this initiative forward. The scope of the BPR, as we look at on the next slide, will consist of multiple process categories, including administrative processes, information systems and data management, and the 8 prioritized process areas for UHR and UCO payroll as illustrated here. As noted, the scope will be modified as appropriate with campus and unit stakeholders. We'll be aiming to partner with all units to gather input and ensure that the proposed future state meets the university's needs. Many stakeholders have already been contacted and have started providing resources and contacts. If you need more information or you haven't yet been engaged, please feel free to contact John Fahey of PMO directly. And that concludes PMO's portion of the town hall. Again, we're excited about our role in supporting these very important university initiatives, and we look forward to working with our various partners and stakeholders, both within and outside of UFA, to further these projects and realize these goals. Thanks again for your time and attention. And with that, we'll open it up for any questions or comments.
Great, thank you, MK. So I know that we are just over time. We do have some questions that are coming in. I'd like to ask maybe 1 or 2 questions right now, and then I'll turn it back over to Mike to close out the meeting. The first question is, will we receive training on NELNET?
Yes, that's an excellent question. Of course, training is always very important. The first thing I would suggest is that there are training videos and materials available on the UCO website. We can send out the link to the group after this is done. But yes, there are training videos. We can also set up individualized trainings for your department with the vendor if you feel that's necessary beyond the materials.
Okay, great. And then this next question is regarding HCM. And the question is, does this mean that is PeopleSoft going away? So I'll raise that question for Ernie, Mike, and Kay.
I'll be happy to take that one. Yeah, ultimately, yes. HCM, as we're describing it here, is the, if you will, the upgrade to the cloud-based version of human resources and payroll system is provided by Oracle. So it will be the natural successor to PeopleSoft. Doesn't mean it will happen all at one time. And in fact, part of the current effort of discovery is to be sure that we understand what is an appropriate sequence for replacing functions that are currently existing in PeopleSoft and adding functions that currently don't exist in PeopleSoft.
Great, thank you. So I think you've answered one of the questions that also was in the chat. There's one other question in here, Mike, if you want to take a moment to answer it now, which is, when will units be included to provide feedback on system requirements that are currently lacking? We employ more than 2,000 students and need to make sure their unique needs are addressed.
Yes, that's a very good question. There's going to be a tremendous amount of consultation in the upcoming business process reengineering phase. That is what you suggest there is one of the key use cases, if you will, that we must identify and must understand where there is a consistency of process across the university for employing students as an example, or where there are differences and perhaps those need to get ironed out or understood why they're different. But there's going to be a tremendous amount of consultation on this because of the fact that, this system touches everybody in one way or another.
I would just add, Mike, that the timeline that's in this presentation, kind of points to that towards the end of fall is when we would start to engage the campus and the units in that business process review, probably when you can expect that, Diana.
And then the question about, is it focused on leveraging AI or automation to the maximum extent possible and practical? Yes, because we have a lot of manual efforts right now that manual functions that could easily be automated or be converted to self-service. So yes, that's a key priority. I think we're actually past time. I want to thank the presenters today for all their good information. I want to thank the over 500 people who joined us as participants today. Hope this was beneficial to you. As usual, we will be posting materials, questions, and a recording of this to the UFA website later on. And thank you all for attending, and see you next time.